Good morning, beloved. I greet you from Brooklyn, USA, and I'm happy to greet friends from my hometown in Columbus, Ohio, to Dr. C. Dexter Wise III, the pastor, Dr. Shirley Wise, and to the Reverend Jason Johnson, the leader of the men's ministry. I am delighted to share this time with you as you celebrate in these different and difficult times the importance of celebrating men who love Christ and are called according to his purpose. This opportunity gives me a chance to come home at least as close as I can, and as it were, to rekindle and reconnect lifelong friendships and to connect with new friends who are here today. I pray God's blessing upon you and Faith Ministries Church, and ask God to bless you to be a blessing to the people of Columbus and beyond and throughout the world. I'm happy to be here on Men's Day, and I usually in doing a day with a theme, my predecessor, Dr. Taylor, would say there are 3 ways to deal with a theme. One is to deal with it. The second is to not deal with it. The third is to mention it and then go about and talk about what you want to talk about. But I really like your theme today, Men on a Mission, and I want to deal with your theme today, and I want us to do that by turning to the book of Acts, the 13th chapter, and I just want to read one verse for us, and we'll tell some of the story beyond it, but everything we need is in this first verse of this 13th chapter of Acts. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Now in the church at Antioch, there were prophets and teachers: Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, a member of the court of Herod the ruler, and Saul. Now in the church at Antioch there were prophets and teachers: Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, a member of the court of Herod the ruler, and Saul. Men on a mission. The placards went up around the road at Antioch to say that there were men at work there. In fact, we know Antioch and its continuing legacy, and we hail it as an important space in the formation of the early church, because the scripture declares that the people were first called Christians at Antioch. Of course, some 2,000 years have gone by. Not all of them have been good since those earliest days of inception. Not all of them have been good public press for the church and for Christians. But what we do know was that the first calling of Christians, using the term Christian, was in fact a derogatory, a slander, a besmirch upon what they were doing. It was the word to be called Christian was to make fun of their group and to feel as if it was a way of putting them down. But across the years, through ups and downs, the church owes the people at Antioch for sticking fast to that name. And although it was a slander when first called, that we are still working to clean in fact, to represent a word or that moniker as being little Christs in a world in which we are, even among ourselves, confused and conflicted about what the word means. Nevertheless, I want to just spend the time with you opening up what Dr. Luke gets to us as he describes the 5 men who were there as prophets and teachers. To be sure, dear friends, this was not title per se, because one could be prophetic and also an educator in whatever profession or work one has. We have seen that throughout our history, that people have functioned as prophets and teachers. They have learned us something, or they have told us something that we needed to hear. And so it is, I want to look at these men on the mission that they might inspire us to be men on a mission today. I just want you to look at them, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of them as we go forward. The first one was Barnabas. We know that he was known as the encourager. I would like to think that he's been around a while, that perhaps the scripture is paying deference to the people who have, in fact, been the griots, the sages, the folks whose experience has brought us through to, or their experiences have helped us in our experiences. They have shown us that the bad days were not to our destruction, and that the good days should not be to our own aggrandizement, that we continue to work steadily and fully. And Barnabas, I see him perhaps bald or with a receding hairline. His hair is gray. He has furrows in his brow from experiences and choices he has made, both good and bad, but all enduring. Barnabas is kind of like the corner man in Muhammad Ali's. We depicted Muhammad Ali's a picture. The man who puts words into the ear of the people who are doing action to encourage them, to remind them that there is nothing that we can't do. Rumble, black man, rumble. Who's the champ? You the champ. This is our day. We're going to rumble. We are going to rumble. We all need some encouragement from somebody, and men will not survive without encouragement from other men, and from other men, older men who have come through. It starts in their youth. Barnabas, the older encourager man. Simeon, called Niger. Simeon, called Niger. Simeon, called Niger. Perhaps that word sounds like something you may have been called in your own day. Simeon is a man so dark, his translation for this is Simeon called black. And you know the vile words that have come through history to mark those of us who are black people. Simeon called Niger. Imagine this, that while other folks in Antioch were called Christian, Simeon might be called that Niger Christian. Yes. Here is a strange way in which, by showing up, even saying good morning, hey black, how you doing black? What's up black? He's distinguished perhaps by the pigment of his skin. God does not make a difference of hue when it comes to the work that has to be done in any moment. God chooses us from all across the spectrum, particularly those of us who are children of the diaspora. We are everything from midnight black, mahogany black, ebony black, honey brown black, steel black, chocolate black, light chocolate black, milk chocolate black, steel black, honey, butter brown, and then butter yellow, but yet brown and still black. We are all across the spectrum. It calls us to think, how do we put ourselves together? How do we see what is acceptable and what is comfortable for us? Some of us may be out of place in some ways, feeling that somehow, as Langston Hughes said, I was the darker child, and they always met me eat in the kitchen. An old man, a show-enough black man. And then Lucius of Cyrene. Now, this is going to take a little more time because you already know Cyrene, because Cyrene was the home of the man who carried the cross for Jesus when he could carry it no longer for himself to Calvary. Simon of Cyrene. And there he was, picking up the Lord's cross. Now, I've seen all kind of biblical depictions, biblical movies, and all of this, and I've watched them, and I've always struggled with the colorizing of the main characters, including Jesus, particularly those like the King of Kings in the 50s with Jeffrey Hunter, who, by the way, was an alcoholic when they found him, who with the baby blue eyes, and all of these pictures of Jesus that reinforce the fact that Jesus must have been a Caucasian. And so it is Dr. Luke, who is the first writer who takes both the church and the gospel and the church, the works of Jesus and the works of those whom he left. And we come to this person, Lucius of Cyrene. Now, so you know that Cyrene is in North Africa, and so you know that in every movie where there wasn't anything but white folks in the movie, when they came down to carrying the cross, they found a black man to carry it. Lucius of Cyrene, now where modern day Libya is in North Africa. So it is what I want to argue with you today. I want you to consider, I don't want to have a fight, but I want you to consider what I'm about to say. And that is that this Lucius of Cyrene could in fact be Luke, the gospel writer himself. Now, there are people who have been making these assumptions all along. Most people make assumptions about Luke. They say that he is from Antioch. Well, we are in Antioch now, and maybe by the time he starts to write, he is in fact a resident of Antioch. But I would venture to say to you that if I ask you, where are you from? You may say right now that you're from Columbus, meaning that you are a resident of Columbus, but many of you are not from Columbus originally. You came there from somewhere and you made Columbus your home. So it is possible for somebody who is actually from another place to move to a new place and then have that place known as home. So this whole idea of Luke, most scholars want to say that Luke is from Antioch. But wait, let me show you something. You see, I believe Luke is a soul brother. And let me tell you why I believe that. There's some textual evidences in both the book of the Gospel of Luke and in the book of Acts. First of all, I think Luke is black because he's got that thing about black people have always been great storytellers. And in fact, some of our best storytellers, even the liars and the signifiers, the people who could tell a story, Richard Pryor, other folks like that, who talked to us, showed us the gift we have. And so Luke kind of starts off in a way of brothers I've heard in the neighborhood, as somebody tells a story, Luke says, yeah, that's what he says, but let me tell you what really happened. Luke did that in the gospel where he said, hey, I know a lot of people have told you about what Jesus has done and who he is, but I am going to tell you the real deal. And then he wasn't finished yet. He went on to say, after he told them in the preamble of the Gospel of Luke, that in the preamble, the beginning, the preface of the book of Acts, he said, as I told you in the last part about the things that Jesus had done and said, now I'm going to show you what happened as the works after his resurrection continue to be done by the folks that he had called. So this sense of telling the story and telling a very good story and telling stories better than others, that's one thing. The other thing that makes me think that he is black, or he is this Lucius of Cyrene, is that, as you know, names take different forms depending on regions. A young man who might be called John could be called Jack by his family, could be called Jacques if he was in France, could be called something else depending on where he was. And in fact, some people are called Frederick, others are called Frederick. There are others who are called Fred, Freddie. All these derivatives depending on relationship and all this. Could it be that Luke, Dr. Luke, is in fact Lucius of Cyrene? You see the implications. That makes him the first African commentator on the life of Jesus. First thing. Second thing is that as Luke writes these stories, he tries to write in the third person, but the scholars say there are places at which what come to be known in scholarship as the we statements. He's talking about Paul, he's talking about being on a ship, he's talking about something, and he says in Paul, and he speaks in a third person, and then all of a sudden he lets the cat out of the bag and he says we. And that happens at places where it seems that the writer is impassioned or excited about it. So check this out. You've got Simeon, sure enough black, and Luke, Dr. Luke, passing. Not a word you've heard for a while. But there are always some black people who find themselves more at home pretending that they are not. So then we come to Manaen. The gospel the writer of this text seems to be somewhat kind, discreet in naming who Manaen was. Not a name that you follow through the Gospels at all. Is a name, though. It says in Manaen, who was brought up in the court with Herod the Tetrarch, or Herod the ruler. And you and I think that might be some official title of his. But the truth of the matter is that a title of impression too, and status, that boy, this Manaen is somebody. But recent scholarship has shown us that the word that we translate brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, or the ruler, is actually a phrase that is akin to what we might understand now as foster care. Something must have gone wrong in Manaen's house when he was a child. And his family and his space was no longer a safe space for him. And somebody else took it in. He happened to be taken in by the family of Herod the Tetrarch, or the Texels, and there he grows up in that space. Think about it, dear friends. Somehow we believe that we are made by the people who have made us, or the circumstances, being born on the right side of the track. That in the American culture for many years there was this idea that the perfect family was a husband and a wife, 2 children, 2.5 children actually, a dog named Spot, and a sports utility vehicle. But not everybody grows up in that reality. There are people who, by the vicissitudes and the troubles of life, have had terrible spaces in which they were birthed, circumstances that they did not control, abusive and predatory relatives, and folks who could not provide for them, and or people who just didn't have the means to and resource to make things happen. But that does not mean that A, God can't use you, and B, you can't become somebody. That God, there are so many. I wish we had an opportunity even this morning just for someone to say what God has brought them through. You will discover that not everybody came from a perfect family, and God uses folks. Look at this: old men, balding with receding hairline, black, sure enough black men, passing people, and folks whose homes are messed up. And then what's very interesting about this, did you read this text carefully? Because it says, and at Antioch there were certain men. There was Barnabas and Simeon called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, brought up in the home of Herod the ruler, and Saul. And Saul. And Saul. Curious, isn't it? And Saul. After listing perhaps all of the failures and faults of the folks who were ahead, we get this: and Saul. You remember Saul, don't you? Saul was persecuting those who were the believers a few chapters earlier. But he had a moment of transformation, and his name is Saul when God meets him. The last chosen, the insignificant, the place of insignificance. Like, the last man who is drafted in the NFL draft every year wears the moniker Mr. Irrelevant. This text makes me remember something that I really do not want to remember. You see, my father, before he went full-time as pastor of the church in Columbus, he was a foreman at the Timken Roller Bearing Company on Cleveland Avenue. And in fact, every summer they had a family outing for all of their employees' children. For most of my young life, I was too young to go. My brother and sister, who were 4 and 6 years ahead of me, got to go, and I had to stay home. It was a company way for the families to interact with each other. And I finally got old enough to go, and we were playing some game. It might have been like Red Rover or something like that called for some physical ability. My brother and sister were chosen in the early choices. I was the last pick. There were 2 of us left. the two teams had to decide between me and a kid who I had heard about before I gotten there. He had become a legend in that space because he was weak and scrawny, and they picked on him and they called him names. In fact, they gave him a name, Sissy Man. Cruel children called him Sissy Man. And I confess to you that the last two people standing were me and Sissy Man and Saul. But watch this. By the 9th verse of this very same text, by the 9th verse of this same chapter, we get a parenthetical statement, and Saul, who was also called Paul. And from that point on, the whole New Testament takes a turn, and we never hear him called Saul again. He is called Paul, as he authors so many epistles to churches all over the Christian landscape, as he wrote in his own hand, with his own sores, with his own debilitation in his hands, named Paul. You see, when God met him, he was Saul. When God worked with him and he got with some other men, he naturally came into the power of being Paul. And from that point on, we never talk about Saul again. And so here they are. Here's our starting five. Barnabas, the encourager. Simeon, called Black. Lucius, the passing. Manaen, the foster child who got a second chance. And Saul. And here's my word for you today on this Men's Day at Faith Ministries. Think about, God did not choose 5 of the same men. They were all very different, one from another. They all brought their own liabilities and their own gifts to the work. Some of those gifts yet to be understood in public. Some of those gifts perhaps never to be understood by the full public, but appreciated by that group of men who had committed themselves to working together. And if God can do that in Antioch, in a place where Christians were first considered to be a derogatory, vagabond, motley crew of nobodies, if God can do that in Antioch, what do you think God can do with a starting 5 in Columbus right now? What could God do with a starting 5 at Faith Ministries right now? What kind of new opportunities, what kind of new joys, what kind of power and empowering and encouragement for all the men of Columbus and the world. What a model for the possibility that God can do and work with anybody. So I'm saying to you, my brother, it doesn't matter what you were before Christ met you. It doesn't matter what you were before you decided to get on this mission. God can take who you are, put you together with some folks you don't even know, who you never would have thought about getting together with. And when God gets through with you, that Antioch church will become a marker for history to come. And the work of Faith Ministry, men and men on this mission, will become a marker for the world to come. And I challenge you. Find your other brothers. No man can do it by himself. Find brothers and look for brothers who you even think you might not be able to work with, and watch God when you all bring yourself. The scripture says a little later on that they were worshiping the Lord and fasting. These unknown, disassociated men, worshiping, fellowshipping, fasting together, got a mind of Christ for mission, and they were able to be a part of that great coronation of people who the New Testament says that those apostles turned the world upside down. What we need right now so desperately are men who are willing to be a part of turning the world right side up. Barnabas, Simeon, Lucius, Manaen, and Saul. Let's get it done. God bless. Have a blessed day.